I'm Bonnie Gardner. I'm co-chair of the Public Affairs Forum of the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Austin. Our forums are free and open to the public and occur most Sundays at noon, and we encourage you to attend. We're located at 4700 Grover Avenue, and you can find out more about our programs by going to our website at www.austinuu.org. Today, I am thrilled to be introducing a friend of mine, Bill Oakey, who is quite an expert on affordability issues. Those are issues which are dear to all of us. They affect us very directly. He's going to be talking about Austin affordability challenges, goals, and reforms. This year is kind of a tipping point for affordability in Austin, and there are some citizens who've lived here for many years who are being forced out of their homes by the high property taxes. And so what can be done about this? There's concern that the city has had a priority of encouraging new people to move to Austin, contributing to traffic, congestion, etc., and that we probably need to reconsider some of the incentives that have been offered to big businesses to move here, etc. So Bill has been researching these issues. He is a retired accountant who worked for several state agencies for over 36 years. He writes a popular blog called AustinAffordability.com. While he's not working for the taxpayers at City Hall or the Travis County Commissioner's Court, he is a wonderful artist photographer. His community activism began in the early 1980s when he first challenged a 20% Austin electric rate increase. He studied the city budget and he discovered that half the rate increase was based on the assumption that a lignite bond proposal was going to pass. Then those bonds didn't pass, and he came back very persistently and convinced the city council to cut the increase in half. In 1985, he was appointed to the City Electric Utility Commission, and his new slogan was, "My name is Bill, and I'd like to lower yours." In 1987, he took two proposals to the Texas legislature and got them both enacted into law. One was the over 65 school tax freeze. That's important to many of us here. The other was a truth in taxation law that requires full disclosure and simple language in public hearing notices on local property tax increases. He has the AustinAffordability.com blog, and he started that out with a comprehensive 3-year report, Why Lack of Affordability is Killing Austin. So, I want to just let... He also had some commentary opposing the Austin rail bond election. I'll let you tell us his thoughts on these things, and please give a warm welcome to Bill Oakey.
Well, Bonnie, thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be here, and I always enjoy talking about affordability. It's something worth fighting for, and as she mentioned, I got started doing this back in the 1980s. One of the things that kind of inspired me to get back involved now, because 30 some odd years ago, back in the 80s, we had a lot of specific issues to deal with, and my life changed, and I got involved in a lot of other things. Well, there was another electric rate case back in 2012 that I had to get involved in. I pulled a bunch of consumer organizations together, and we did pretty well on that, but there are some significant issues still to be addressed, and there may be another electric rate case, believe it or not, coming up in the next few months. It won't be as big as the last one, but hopefully we can win the remaining issues that we were unable to win during this last one. I'm putting a whole lot of faith in this new 10-1 city council district system that we're going to have for the first time. I think we'll have a very good cross-section of representatives from different parts of Austin that have not had direct representation before, and I think overall the balance of this grassroots city council is going to be more on the side of the people and less on the side of the big special interests who've had so much control in the past. So I am very excited about that opportunity, and I'm looking forward to getting involved with these new council members, and I hope everyone in here will get in touch with their council members as well, and let's all work together as part of the process. Now, Bonnie mentioned that I wrote a report when I started the blog last year. It was, I believe, in August of last year that I published this report called Why Lack of Affordability is Killing Austin, and it's a moving target, so I could probably revise that thing and come up with a whole lot more to add to it. It's just shocking to think how many statistics there are that describe the affordability problem in Austin. And I can give you just a few examples. A lot of people may not realize that Austin has the fastest growing pre-seniors population ages 50 to 65, and the second fastest growing senior population. Now, a lot of people think of Austin as being a town of young hipsters. Well, there certainly are a lot of young hipsters here, and there's a lot of recruiting going on to bring more young hipsters down here. But Austin has been here a long time. We have outlasted a lot of trends, and it would be a huge mistake for Austin to become the type of place that only plans for whatever the latest trend is. Because if we were to do that now, what would happen to all the seniors in Austin who have invested all these years in a job in Austin, in a home in Austin, and doing volunteer work and all these things? A lot of these people feel like they've had their backs, people have turned their backs on them and allowed them to suffer a lot of financial pain. When you wake up one morning and you see a bulldozer coming down the street and they're getting ready to scrape off another property that you knew the neighbors there that lived there for a long time, and when they bought their house it was quite affordable, and maybe when you bought yours it was quite affordable. You could afford your taxes with the job that you had and with the pay raises that you got, but how many people do you know who literally could not afford to walk down their own sidewalk and turn back around and buy that house again, the very house that they're living in right now? They could not afford to walk down that sidewalk and put the key in the door and make a down payment on that house at today's prices. It's just unbelievable. I used to argue with my sister about that particular subject. I would be telling her that, Austin is changing so rapidly, and the cost of living is going up so fast, and the cost of housing and taxes is going up so fast that it's going to reach a breaking point, and it's going to lead to a boom and bust again. And I still believe that. But my sister grew up in California in the 60s and 70s and 80s, and she said, this is nothing new. I mean, there's no difference between what happened in California back then and what happens in Austin today. And we used to think California was headed for trouble. Well, guess what, folks? California did get into trouble. They tried to address it with the Proposition 13, and that didn't work out very well. It was good for the taxpayers on the one hand, but because of the revenue shortfalls, the schools declined in quality, and now they have a water crisis in California, and they're always having 11th hour budget crises year after year. And so I'm not so sure that we want to follow in the footsteps of California. And the other thing is that we don't have the pay scale. We never did have the pay scale, not even close to what the people in California have been paid and are being paid today to live with the high costs that they have out there. So one of the things I like to do is talk about a few of the things that I have worked on to try to address affordability. And Bonnie mentioned the 1987 law that created the school tax freeze for people over 65. Well, here in the city of Austin, we did not have an increase in our over 65 homestead exemption. There's an exemption that you can get once you turn 65. You can apply for an over 65 homestead exemption. That had not changed since Ronald Reagan was president. It had never been indexed. And so I met with one of the city council members and got them to agree to put it on the agenda and vote on it this spring. But I found out they were running into stumbling blocks, and they didn't have, as of Tuesday of that week, they didn't have enough votes to pass the increase in the over 65 homestead exemption. So I just kept working on it, and on the night before the vote, at 2 o'clock in the morning, I found the smoking gun. I found all the statistics that proved that Austin had the lowest over 65 homestead exemption of all the major cities in the state of Texas. So I wrote up that information and posted links to each one of those references for each of those cities, and I sent it to the media, and I sent it to the city council. And the next morning, Thursday, on the day of the vote, I got a phone call, and they were telling me that these talking points that I had sent to them were going to work, and they did think they have the votes to pass it, and they did. And not only did they pass an increase, but they also agreed that starting next year, they're going to index the over 65 homestead exemption so that we will have something that we can depend on. That's a major reform. The other thing that happened last year was I read an article in the newspaper, and I started seeing various news reports about a new Travis County courthouse. They're wanting to build a new civil and family courthouse, and the price tag that was publicized for this courthouse last year was $300 million. And I got to thinking, that is a heck of a lot of money for one building, for a courthouse. And why did they need such a big courthouse, and why would it cost that much? And so I started doing some research. And one of the things I discovered was that in Broward County, Florida, they were in the process of building a brand new civil and family courthouse, but it was going to be half the cost per square foot as the one that was being planned for Travis County. And I just thought that was fascinating because, you know, that's a hurricane zone, and they're able to build a quality courthouse that was just as much capacity as the one that we were considering for Travis County at half the cost per square foot. So I delved into that and did some more research and found out that, lo and behold, they had put that courthouse on a bond election and put it before the voters about a year prior to that, and it was over $400 million, and it failed. And so they had to go back to square one, and they had to figure out what can we possibly do to lower the cost of this courthouse. And so immediately I thought, well, let's take advantage of the lessons that were learned in Broward County, and let's try to get Travis County to not make that same mistake, and let's try to get them to build an affordable courthouse and do it right the first time. So I took that information to the Commissioner's Court, and I emailed it to them, and I spoke to them on Citizens Communications, and I thought, well, they'll just say thank you very much, and that'll be the end of it, or they may not even comment at all. Well, much to my surprise, they invited me into their offices, and they helped set up an appointment with some of their planning staff. And then they appointed me to a citizens focus group to help advise the commissioners on the new courthouse. And then a few months ago, they hired the same architectural design team that designed the Broward County courthouse. And so now I have some hope, some optimism that we will wind up with a proposal for a courthouse that will not cost $300 million. Hopefully, it will be a lot more cost-effective than that. So these efforts take a lot of time and a lot of work and a lot of persistence. But affordability is just such a broad topic. I know there's some people who think of affordability as just being affordable housing. Well, yes, affordable housing is a very important component of it, especially for the lower and middle income people. And one of the problems we have in Austin that I think is absolutely shameful is the fact that the people who live in subsidized housing for all these years have had to put up with landlords who won't do their repairs, landlords who are unresponsive to health and safety issues. And, you know, there was a balcony that collapsed on one of these low-income housing complexes, apartment complexes. And, you know, there's been a lot of lip service paid to the issues of affordable housing and a lot of lip service paid to making the landlords keep their properties up to code. Well, these are the kinds of things that you can't sit by and rely on lip service. We've got to start holding people's feet to the fire. So what I tried to do was I tried to think of how many different categories of affordability are there, how many separate issues are there that we can address. But one of the things I wanted to start with, and I think this is an appropriate starting point, is what is the purpose of the city of Austin? What are the values that the people of Austin hold? So do we even have a mission? Because if you don't know the answer to that question, and I don't know the answer to it, but if you just look around at the way the city's been operating for as many years as I can remember, it seems like the number one goal is how many new people can we get to come here? How many new companies? Yeah, how many new companies can we bring in? And how many big festivals can we have? And how much money can we give away to the people who run those festivals? How much taxpayer money can we give away to them so that we can just get more and more and more people to come down here? Well, a friend of mine really drove that point home quite literally. I don't drive because I'm too nearsighted, so she gave me a ride up and down Lamar Boulevard, and we were pretty much starting close to downtown and going further south. And on both sides of the street, everywhere you looked, there were these big multifamily complexes that were popping up like mushrooms. And I looked at her and I said, well, how can they approve that many of those things? Won't that make the traffic congestion a whole lot worse? I mean, how in the world are we supposed to accommodate all these new people? Well, it turns out that the big vision that the city has right now is to turn as many of our major thoroughfares as possible into what the consultants like to call corridors. And each one of those corridors has to have its own master plan. Well, this whole thing, and this is all part of the Imagine Austin process. Well, one of the corridor experiments that most of you are probably familiar with is East Riverside. And so what they did was they decided they were going to modernize and upgrade East Riverside. Well, I can summarize all of those concepts with one simple word: gentrification. These corridor master plans are gentrification plans. What they did on East Riverside was they bulldozed the low-cost student apartments that were there that gave lots of people an affordable section of town that they could live in based on the incomes that they had. It was absolutely ideal for them. So instead of just coming in and fixing up the streets and maybe enhancing the park amenities and trying to beautify the area, instead of doing that, they changed all the zoning so that developers could come in and bulldoze everybody out of their houses and put in all these huge block-long size mega complexes that are like big box housing units. And I learned something fascinating about how all that process works, and it ties in to a certain extent with transportation, because the rail bond issue that we just had that failed by 57% was all tied into high-density development. And when I went back through the Austin Chronicle archives to learn about these corridor plans and learn about the history of rail planning in Austin, it turns out that they had that East Riverside portion of the rail plan on the books almost 10 years ago. There was a consultant group called Roma that had East Riverside in the plan, and I went back and found the date and the Chronicle reporting on the passage of the East Riverside Corridor Master Plan, and it turns out that the Planning Commission came to that City Council meeting and made an 11th hour appeal to please don't do away with the neighborhood compatibility standards for East Riverside. We want to preserve the neighborhood compatibility. But the developer said, no, we don't want to do that. We want to build very high-density development which will ignore all the current standards so that we can pack in a whole lot more people. And the City Council said, okay, so they did what the developers asked them to do and ignored the appeals of the Planning Commission. And then the very next sentence in this Austin Chronicle, which was, 7 or 8 years ago, it said that in the very next sentence, if they had not done this, it would have been a lot more difficult to pass the rail bonds that we're planning for the East Riverside Corridor. So anybody who has the idea that Project Connect, which was just born maybe a year and a half ago, if anybody thinks they did an objective study to figure out what would be the best route for the rail, and if anybody thinks that a bunch of brand new statistics and brand new data was analyzed to show that that was the most appropriate place to put the rail, you have to be smoking something, because the special interests had this whole thing planned out almost 10 years ago, and fortunately the people have spoken and said, no, that's not what we want to do. We don't want to have the largest tax increase in Austin history. So we really did have quite a victory when that thing was defeated. Transportation is indeed a very important part of affordability. But there are so many mistakes being made. I'll make a couple more comments about the corridor studies, and then I'll talk about another aspect of transportation. But the next corridor plan that was supposed to come after East Riverside was the Airport Boulevard corridor. And when I started researching that, I found out that it had stagnated. I mean, they had a bunch of meetings about 3 years ago to try to pump up this East Riverside corridor, and they were going to anchor the whole thing with Austin Community College building a major campus expansion there, which has come to pass. But the rest of the gentrification, or whatever else you want to call it, along Airport Boulevard has not come to pass yet. So apparently the developers got impatient with the city and said, well, if it's not going to happen there, let's go ahead and move over to Burnett Road. And so the city has agreed to make the Burnett Road corridor plan their next priority, and I guess they'll just put Airport Boulevard on hold for a while. Well, look out for Burnett Road. The Omeletry restaurant, which is a wonderful place that I've been going to for ever since the 1980s, is already about gone. It's fixing to move. I don't know what's going to happen to the nice little pet shops and bakeries and family-owned businesses along there. I hate to think that on both sides of Burnett Road, as far as you want to go in either direction, would just be covered by these giant, big-box mega complexes. And there's a couple of problems with these mega complexes, by the way. They do provide housing for people who can afford it, but what I've been told is that the going rate now in one of these complexes for an 800-square-foot, one-bedroom housing unit, $1,600 a month to start. That's the lowest price for the new ones that they're building. That doesn't sound like the Austin, Texas that I am familiar with. And by the way, they're not building condos much anymore. It's all about high rent. Let's just build luxury rental units, get in the people from California or New York or wherever who can afford these, have a nice high-tech job, and it can afford to pay as much rent as possible. But let's not give them a chance to own anything. Let's not give them a chance to build any equity and own their own home. Well, I think that's a terrible mistake. That's another trendy thing that seems to be working in a few places like Portland, which is often used as a good example for Austin. Well, it's a nice, trendy thing for the young hipsters. But what's going to happen to those young hipsters when they decide that, okay, they came down here because they wanted to party all night long, and they wanted to go to all the music festivals, and they didn't care about raising a family. But what happens when they get to be 30, 35, whatever, and, they've partied all they want to, and they want to settle down, they want to stay in Austin, they'd like to have a house and a yard and all that, where are they going to go? Because the neighborhoods in the central part of the city, and when I say central, it's gradually becoming the entire perimeter of Austin, the entire city limits of Austin is gradually becoming gentrified, gradually turning into McMansions. And I just think that if we don't wake up, if we don't take notice to what's happening to the city, and if we don't make our voices be heard, we could lose the whole thing. It could all become so unaffordable that we would have to either leave Austin entirely or move so far out into the suburbs that it would take an hour each way or longer, hour and a half maybe, to get into Austin every single time you want to come here to do something. So I think what needs to happen with the new city council is we've got to have several grassroots reforms. And here's one that I started with back in 1988. I actually went to City Hall, and I got tired of having to wait 6 hours to speak at a public hearing. If it was an electric rate hearing or a budget hearing or something like that where the whole city was invited to come and speak, you could go down there and it would always be posted at 4 o'clock. But it could be well past 10 o'clock or 10:30 before they ever started calling any of the public speakers. And I thought, well, this needs to be reformed. So I wrote up a proposal, and I got one of the city council members, 2 of them, to sponsor it. And when I got down there, I had to wait 5 or 6 hours to make my proposal to reform that. And so the next morning, and I went down to the Austin History Center just recently and found the American Statesman article that talked about it, and the title of it was something like "Agenda Reform Proponent Kept Waiting." And one of the things that I said in my appeal back then was that if you will just reform the process so that people can come down in a timely manner and let their voices be heard, you will elevate the weekly dog and pony show to the status of pedigrees and thoroughbreds. And so here we are 26 years later, and I'm still waiting for that reform. And so I am going to carry it forward to the new city council and see if we can finally get something done about that. Another thing that occurred to me is that, we talked a little bit before about lip service, about how if you talk to anybody who's on the city council today, they will all tell you, and you can listen to their speeches when they're out campaigning, they will all tell you that affordability is a critical issue, and if you vote for me, I will do something about affordability. Well, a lot of that is just lip service because they know that that's what people want to hear. Well, I have another reform for a public engagement ordinance, and what that would do is if the city is having a major plan, like the Code Next revision to the Land Development Code, or the Imagine Austin plan that would be the city's overall comprehensive master plan, or something like Project Connect, where you have the city and Capital Metro supposedly coming together to devise a transportation plan. This public engagement reform would require them to actually take the public input and incorporate it into the plans. They would have to have a formal process to where when the public shows up and fills out a comment card, or when they stand up and speak, or when they send in a suggestion, it actually has to be listed, quantified, and incorporated into the plans instead of just being used to pay lip service to. And the reason I developed that proposal was that I decided to go ahead and start looking into what's going on with this Code Next code revision thing, and they actually have a report that's called Listening to the Community. And I thought, I want to see how they're using the public input. Well, so I started leafing through that report, and they had all these cute little phrases that were in quotes, but there wasn't one single place in that entire report where they even said what the public input was. It never even had a chart saying that 60% of the people want this kind of code revision, or 40% of the people are opposed to this one, and whatever. There was no quantification, no acknowledgement even of what any of the public comments were, except for a few broad quotes like they want walkable, compact, whatever. So it's time for the people to turn this around. It's time to have some bottoms-up, grassroots democracy going on in Austin, and I think we can do that. I have a sense that the people in here believe that we can do that. So I'm going to look down here. Okay, so there's a number of other things that they have not gotten right, and one of them is that they have a budget process every year. And usually at the end of the budget process, they'll say, okay, we're going to keep the tax rate the same this year, folks. Isn't that wonderful? Or we're going to actually lower the tax rate for the first time. I remember Mayor Leffingwell last year saying, guess what, folks? We're going to lower the tax rate by, 7/100ths of a penny or something like that. And we were all supposed to get excited about that. Well, the problem is, as everybody knows, your house appraisals keep going up every single year. And they can go up under Texas law. They can go up as much as 10% each year, and they can't tax you above 10%. But the problem is that if it goes up, say, 20%, and they can only tax you on that 10% of that 20, guess what? The rest of it's going to come back and bite you the next year. So I have a truth in taxation proposal that would require them to actually calculate how much the average tax bill is on the average assessed value of a home from one year to the next, so that if it actually comes out to like an 8% tax increase, they have to advertise that 8%, and they have to put it in the budget in black and white that we are going to raise the average homeowner's tax bill by 8%, 7%, or whatever it is. And one of the shocking things is I was researching online, and I found a City of Austin training manual that trains the staff on how to do the budget proposal to the City Council, and they start with the highest legal maximum that they can. So they will come out with a budget, and it'll be set at that 8% rollback rate, which is the highest rate that they can have under the law without triggering a petition drive for a rollback. And so what the City Council will do is they'll say, okay, we now have the staff budget proposal, and by the way, we have an $18 million or a $15 million budget shortfall. So now we've got our own plans for the budget, but we've got this huge budget shortfall. So what are we going to do? Are we going to close recreation centers? Are we going to cut back library hours? Are we going to close swimming pools? Oh, my gosh, what are we going to do to get rid of this budget shortfall? So they have all these meetings, and they have all these work sessions, and they duke it out with each other, and finally they say, well, guess what? We have successfully compromised, and we've erased the budget shortfall. But what that means is they've only gotten it down to that 8% above the current level. They've gotten it down to that legal maximum, because when all the wish lists came in, that's what created this so-called shortfall. So what I think they need to do is what's normally called zero-based budgeting, and they need to start with zero. They need to start with whatever a zero effective tax rate would be, and that's what it's called. It's called the effective tax rate, which is the same rate that it would raise the same amount of revenue that they raised the year before, and it would come up with a zero tax bill for the average assessed value of a home. And then the true and honest way to publicize any tax increase above the effective rate would be how they would publicize it. And so that's my tax, and the way I worded it, and it's a formal proposal that I've submitted to the City Council, is that they would put a taxpayer impact statement in the budget that would actually show the percentage and the dollar amount of a tax increase for homes valued anywhere from $100,000 up to $1 million, so that you could actually look at that chart and see this is the tax increase that they're proposing. So if you want to come down and speak at the public hearing, you would actually be able to see in dollars and cents how much your tax bill is going up. It would be straightforward transparency for the first time if Austin were to adopt that reform. So the other really important thing that needs to happen, and this is probably the most important thing of all, is that it's about time that we defined affordability, and it's about time that we had some kind of strategic affordability plan that talks about what will happen going forward. How much of an affordability problem do we have right now? How many people is it affecting? And so on. Because I can tell you that the city is already planning something like a 33.6% increase in property tax revenue. They're forecasting that over the next 5 years. Well, my question is, can we really afford that? They make these plans, but they don't explain, how we're supposed to pay for it. An even worse statistic is that CAMPO, which is the Capital Area Metropolitan Planning Organization that does our transportation planning, they just published a report that you can see online that says it will cost $32.4 billion over the next 25 years for the 5-county Austin metropolitan area, and that comes out to $1.3 billion every single year for 25 years in a row to pay for transportation, and 80% of that is supposed to come from local funding sources. How are we supposed to get that money? It doesn't grow on trees. And does anybody in here get raises every 6 months that would add up to enough to pay for something like that? So it's time we had a big reality check. It's time we defined affordability. It's time we developed an affordability strategic plan that has goals and objectives and measurements in there so that we can see the results of and make some real progress to solve affordability in Austin. And I want to thank you all for being here, and I'll be happy to answer some questions.
We have a question from Richard Halpin. Richard?
Thank you, Bonnie. Thank you for your comments today, and you're speaking for people's real issues. We all appreciate it. There's an article on the front page of today's paper about a new committee that the council has appointed to look at affordability rates for low-income citizens and median-income citizens about electric rates. And I've always been puzzled with the idea that how can people who have no money be expected to pay for electric rates that are continuing to go up? Would you comment on that, please?
Well, yes, I've spent a lot of time over the years working on electric rates, and I think that if they are going to have a committee like that, I think it's a good step in the right direction. I don't know the details of that yet, but I've always been in favor of hiring a consumer advocate to represent consumers in these electric rate cases, because I can assure you that the special interests, the big industrial ratepayers, have a pipeline into City Hall. In fact, they have special privilege contract rates that are much lower than what they would have to pay if they didn't have these contracts. And so it's all about, once again, under the governor's plan to bring businesses down here and push all the costs onto the consumers. So I think that if there is going to be a citizens committee, that's a step in the right direction. I would add to that the need for a consumer advocate who would actually serve the consumers in the formal process.
I'm Carl Lindemann, and I live in Travis Heights. And I want to thank you first for your activism and your diligence. I'm sure there are many others who have tried to do what you've done over the years and gave up in great disgust. Quick question. I wonder if you can comment on this. I've been looking at this business about being absolutely addicted to growth, and that this is the one model. And it strikes me this is very much like a loss leader sale. A store that wants to build up volume sells below cost. And the below cost here is the cost of transportation and infrastructure. If you keep a loss leader sale going too long, you go out of business. So when do we go out of business?
Well, that question is absolutely perfect, because one of the things I didn't get a chance to get to, and you're giving me that opportunity right now, I want to give you what I call the Amy's ice cream analogy of how Austin is not being planned properly, how Austin's growth is not being planned properly. If you were the CEO of Amy's Ice Cream and all of your investors told you that they wanted you to expand the business so that everybody could make more money, well, one of the things that they would do is they would say, well, now, if we want to expand and build more stores, how many more stores can we afford to build this year? How many can we afford to build next year? And we'll plan this thing out for the next 5 years. Let's develop a 5-year plan. And in order to do that, they would have to look at their cash flow. And they would have to say, well, gosh, do we have enough money coming in to pay for this many stores, or should we cut it back? We've got to watch our cash flow. And how many customers are there in these various areas that we want to expand into, and how many other ice cream places are already there? What's our competitive picture look like, and so on? Well, guess what? The way the city of Austin does it is real simple. Build first and ask questions later. There is no analysis of any kind. And that's why I have a tagline on my blog that says, let's put the public's ability to pay into Austin's planning process. They will fail just the same way that a business would. If they overbuild without regard to how much it's going to cost, that's exactly what leads cities into a boom and bust. And so we have got to encourage the new city council to take these planning documents that they already have, like the 5-year financial forecast that I just told you had a 33.6% property tax revenue increase, and this Campo plan that has a $34 billion increase in transportation spending over 25 years. Put those plans into some kind of realistic perspective. Look at the incomes of the people and try to figure out how much is too much, and then figure out what you have to do to put the brakes on to avoid a boom and bust.
My name is Robin Orlowski, and my question, leading into what we were talking about with Campo, my question is, what can we do to improve public transportation in the area? Capital Metro has raised fares but reduced services. This particularly impacts low-income people and people with disabilities.
That's a wonderful question. I was very active in this last year when there was a first phase of price increases, fare increases for Capital Metro. And I was on top of them. In fact, I went to the previous chairman, who is Commissioner Margaret Gomez on the County Commissioner's Court, and asked her to write a letter to the current Capital Metro Board and urge them not to increase the fares for seniors and citizens with disabilities. And they were also going to take away the one-day pass that you can get on Capital Metro. I've actually got one here. When you get on the bus, you can get a one-day pass, and then you can use it for 24 hours. And it's only cost the price of a single fare. And if you're a senior or someone on disabilities, that pass is only $1. They were going to do away with those passes completely, and figure that people could just get a weekly pass. Well, what if you don't ride the bus every day all week long? And what if you have to change buses to get somewhere? And so now that the rail thing has failed, the new city council is going to have an opportunity to appoint brand new board members to Capital Metro. So our priorities need to be reversing the very problems that you're talking about. We need to expand the Capital Metro bus service to the communities in East Austin and Southeast Austin and other neighborhoods that don't have sufficient bus service. We need to get them to come back and improve the frequency, because they cut back the frequency on a lot of the routes. We've had the budget for Capital Metro has been drained somewhat because of this red line rail system that they put in, and we need to let them know that we care about the bus system.
This is kind of a follow-on to the previous question. I live in the southwest part of Austin, quite a ways out, and there's a tremendous demand for people to be downtown, which is why you get these things like the bulldozers coming down the street to, make small houses mega mansions. Could you comment on sort of the general effect of mass transit on the affordability issue, or rather the lack of mass transit and the affordability issue?
Well, if we don't have a good mass transit system, it forces everybody to drive, and it forces everybody to sit in their cars and burn up gasoline. So it's not good for the environment, and it's very expensive. And the people who can least afford it to pay for their own car and their own gasoline and all that are the ones who have to live the farthest away, because that's the only way that they can find housing that they can afford. So ultimately, it would be ideal if we could have both an expanded bus system and some kind of a rail system. But the experts that I rely on, who've been working with rail in Austin for all these years and studying it for all these years, people like Lyndon Henry and Dave Dobbs, and there are several of them. They all agree that the cities that are the most successful with mass transit start with the corridors where the heaviest bus routes are. And in Austin, the heaviest bus routes are on North and South Lamar and along Burnett. And instead of trying to put it way over on the east side of campus and expect new development to generate the density to qualify, you have to have a certain amount of population density to qualify for federal funding for mass transit. So if Austin were going to build a rail line, the sensible way to do it would be to put it down a central corridor where the density is there and the transportation need is there, and then be able to expand it. But I'm kind of concerned, and we won't know for sure until some more studies are done, but I'm kind of concerned that Austin may have missed its opportunity for a rail system, because Portland started theirs about 30 years ago. Dallas and Houston started theirs a long time ago, and like everything else, it's gotten a whole lot more expensive to start a brand new rail system, and the federal funding match is now down to 30 to 40% for big cities instead of 50%. So we may not ever get there. It may be too late.
Hi, I'm Helen LaFleur. You started out your talk mentioning the increase in the senior population here, and certainly we've been hearing about that for a couple of years as the silver tsunami in Austin. What we're all finding is there's a terrific shortage of over 55 type housing in the city. Not all of us want to move to Georgetown, where obviously that's a big, increasing community. Who do we approach, or what plans would be involved to include that kind of housing, not just these high-density apartment buildings that they're few and far between, but some real nice senior communities that would be within the city limits or close to it?
Well, I think that's a wonderful question, and I do know that there is a mayor's task force on aging that Mayor Leffingwell appointed, and it's really new. I don't even think they've been in operation for a full year yet. I'm hoping that our next mayor, regardless of who wins, I'm hoping that the next mayor will continue that commission. But if you will just go to the city's website, or else just Google Austin Mayor's Commission on Aging, you'll find them listed, and you should be able to provide some input to them. And then also, the city does have a housing office, and you might try to contact them. I think it's a wonderful question, because I have a friend who lives in some kind of complex that has a senior citizen focus, and I'm not sure how that was structured, but I'd like to find out. So what I guess I'll do is I'll contact her, and if you'll keep an eye on AustinAffordability.com, I'll try to provide an update on that whole issue, because I think it's a good one. Thank you for bringing it to my attention.
Yes, I'm new to Austin, and it seems to me one of the things that makes Austin what it is all the eclectic businesses around here. And it sounds like if the vision is growth for growth's sake, how does that destroy the original Austin of keep it weird kind of mentality?
Well, you're absolutely right. What happens when you have a focus on nothing but luxury housing developments and luxury office buildings and high-rise towers and things of that nature, it makes it very difficult for the small business person to open an eclectic little shop. And, there still are some of those shops out there. But I think that the best thing that I would think needs to happen there is that the people who already own these kinds of businesses ought to kind of form an organization. They need to form some kind of a political lobbying organization or public outreach organization to let everyone know that they're concerned, because you will find little strip centers where these businesses are forced out with higher rent because somebody who owns a huge conglomerate that's not even based in Austin will come down and buy up a whole complex, and then they'll double the rent and bring in, luxury clothing stores and stuff like that, and luxury restaurants and things of that nature that are luxury hairstyling salons and all that, and then your nice little funky local Austin hangout is suddenly gone. Your favorite one in your favorite neighborhood is suddenly no longer there. These things kind of creep up on us. And so I think it may require some mobilization and some organization on the part of the established Austin homegrown business folks who want their voices to be heard.
I've been watching them tear up Mopac for the past several months, and my understanding is the plan is to build a toll lane on Mopac.
Well,
is it too late to do anything about that? It's like,
let me just tell you that part of my philosophy is it's never too late. If I'm willing to wait 26 years for this reform of the city council meeting process, the thing about Mopac, that's another good example of trying to favor the wealthy. The plan they have in place is called express lanes, and so they're going to put in 2 new lanes on Mopac, but they're going to charge a toll on those lanes, and not only are they going to charge a toll, but it's going to be a variable toll, so that during the rush hour, the morning and evening rush hour, the more cars that drive onto those lanes, the higher the toll is going to get. And so if you try to get on there when it's really crowded, you're going to be paying a higher toll, and they're going to let you know before you get on there what that toll is. Well, to me, that is the exact opposite of what we're doing. I call that those are restricted lanes. And what we actually need is we just need 2 new lanes, period. They shouldn't cost anything. And we need to convince the city council that, maintaining the status and the budget of the capital CTRMA, Central Texas Regional Mobility Authority, is going to be running those toll lanes. I could care less about those bureaucrats and how much they're paid. I think they should take a hike. I think the city should get in touch with the state and say, let's convert these back to paid lanes, and let's put that as a first priority. If I-35 and Mopac are not the first 2 priorities for Austin traffic congestion, then who do we hire to come in here to explain it to them,
Okay, my name is Roger Baker. I'm an old friend of Bill's, but I'd like to ask him about, I think we may be in another unsustainable growth boom like we had around the year 2000, and I just wanted to see if Bill can sort of explain what he thinks might happen if we do hit a peak and a growth boom and property taxes actually start to decrease. How would we resolve that problem?
Well, that's a dilemma. It's kind of like the city painting itself into a corner. And I'm going to be starting from day one talking to the new city council about the very fact that if we don't get proactive very quickly about affordability, then we will reach that point where Austin will suddenly no longer be as desirable as it was. And to give you an example, I just read the other day about a business that came down here and saw how bad our traffic congestion was, and they actually said, and this was in the American Statesman, they actually said they wouldn't have come here if they had known that it was this bad. Well, that word is going to get out there, and pretty soon, if we keep building all these high-density places without regard to traffic flow, and we keep getting streets more and more jammed up with cars, and if the it factor starts to decline in some other city that's not as big as Austin suddenly gets anointed as the most hip city in the universe, and they all start going there, then we're going to be left with all the debt that we were stuck with trying to plan for all the growth that we have here. And it's inevitable that trends do change. And there was a time, you only have to go back about 8 or 10 years ago, when Austin wasn't the most popular city. Las Vegas was the fastest growing city in the country. And, look at the big real estate bust that they had, and their economy still hasn't recovered yet. There's been lots of places in California that were popular. One of the biggest problems we're going to have is water. Not only do we not have the roads to serve all this new growth, we don't have the water. And I haven't heard of any plans yet to get more water. I've heard that there's a plan to build a new reservoir, perhaps with some of that new state money that was just authorized by the voters in the constitutional amendment. But I hope the water thing doesn't creep up on us. I hope that the city is willing to do some planning to make sure that we don't run out of water before it's too late.
Hey, thank you. I'm Nick, and I'm usually the camera guy, so not the person behind the microphone. So just listening to this discussion, thank you so much for sharing all of your ideas and being part of the process in Austin to make things affordable. One thing that seems to keep coming up is, frankly, kind of blaming younger people for a lot of these problems. And granted, a lot of younger people are coming to Austin. A lot of older people are coming to Austin also. How do you think is the best way going forward to, regarding this affordability issue, becoming inclusive with the conversation of people who are the 20-somethings who are coming here, who are paying taxes and who are buying homes and who are, being part of the community?
How do we become more inclusive? I think the best way to do that is to quantify what the situation is. We've never had anything close to an affordability strategic plan, and that's one of the reforms that I would like to see happen. If we don't maintain our diversity, have you ever heard of any place in the United States that relies entirely upon a wealthy population? There wouldn't be anybody there to serve them when they go into the restaurants. There wouldn't be anybody to wait on them when they go into the stores. So we absolutely have to have some way of preserving our diversity, and the only way we're going to get there is to do the proper plan.
Bill, we want to thank you for your very dogged and diligent investigation of these issues. This is such a valuable public service, and your proposals are just vitally important. And so, on behalf of all of us, thank you for serving the public interest. Let's give him a big hand.
Well, thank you, too.